Part 2 of Episode 5, Systems Thinking. Welcome back to the Lean English Podcast. I am your host, Tom, and this is the second part of our episode on systems thinking. If you are just joining us, in Part 1, we covered the principles and philosophy of systems theory problem solving and systems thinking. Then we related systems thinking to organizational learning. It is not enough for the head of a company or even an entire division to understand systems thinking. Everyone in the company must embrace these principles or else sub-optimization occurs. We finished Part 1 with lessons from the Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. This is one of the most important works on the subject of systems thinking. I highly recommend it. In Part 2, we will cover the topics of systems archetypes and describe how they are documented using causal loop diagrams. These diagrams are powerful tools for businesses to help them understand the systems that control their actions and how their actions influence other parts. So let's get started. So, why should we create causal loop diagrams? The main benefit of diagramming your company's system is to find the leverage points that you will use to influence the system. These lead to long-term solutions, as short-term thinking depends on linear causality. Linear causality is when we can easily identify causes to our problems. However, nowadays, it is much more difficult to find root causes due to the complex nature of our world and the interconnectivity of our businesses. Another benefit from causal loop diagrams is that there are many systems that have already been diagrammed called systems archetypes. These are systems that are popular throughout history and can be seen everywhere. Understanding these archetypes may help you understand your business even better. When you begin modeling, remember that it should serve a purpose to understand the system you are trying to change. Stop modeling when you understand it well enough to take some action. If you don't, you may fall into the trap of mapping systems that you do not influence. Also, while understanding the system is an important first step, it is not the final activity. Just as value stream mapping by itself does not reduce process waste, system modeling does little if process improvement activities do not follow. As I mentioned earlier, causal loop diagramming is a tool used by engineers to visualize the systems they are trying to understand. Just as process and value stream maps help us understand what we are doing, these maps help us understand the parts of a system that impact our outcomes. There are 4 steps to causal loop diagramming, according to Colleen Lannon. Create variable names. These variables are the things that influence the system. In a city's transportation system, one variable could be the number of single passenger cars owned by its residents. The name could be single car usership. Draw the links. Variables change depending on influences. The link is labeled S or plus sign if they move together, or O or negative sign if they move in opposite directions. For example, single car usership would have the opposite influence on the circulation rate, the time it takes to drive across town. As more people drive cars to work, the number of cars on the road increases, and the circulation rate decreases. Label the loop. Loops are either balancing loops or reinforcing loops. Inside a reinforcing loop, you will find an R, and a B will be found inside a balancing loop. For example, the poor circulation rate may make it undesirable to use a car to get to work because it takes too long to drive across town, thus reducing single car usership. This would create a balancing loop as the variables work together to reduce the stress on the transportation system caused by cars. A reinforcing loop would be created if there was a variable that continued to increase car usership. For example, what if the city built new roads to solve the circulation problem instead of promoting mass transportation options? Well, then people would continue to use their cars to get to work instead of taking the bus. Talk through the loop. Maps are nice for people who know how to read them, but for most people, they will want to hear the story. Create a narrative of what the variables are and how they influence one another. Here is an example to show how variables or parts and influences are represented. In this simple diagram, we see how two parts of a company's system, employee morale and employee stress, influence a third part, employee productivity. The variable in the middle is the part in the system that we are investigating. The company is interested in improving productivity, so they perform an investigation to see what influences it. The arrows show the direction of the influence from one part to another. On the left, we see that morale has a positive or reinforcing influence. As morale goes up or down, productivity goes up or down. On the right side, we see that employee stress has a negative or inverse influence. As stress increases, productivity decreases. As we know in life, not all relationships are linear, and we often must deal with the repercussions of our actions without knowing what caused them. Here we see how causal loop diagramming depicts the downfall of AOL, the internet service provider that owned the majority of the market in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The loop on the left is labeled R, showing it is a reinforcing loop, while the one on the right is labeled with a B for balancing loop. The number 1 helps differentiate it from other reinforcing loops. In a large causal loop diagram, there may be more than one reinforcing or balancing loop. In this system, a company is trying to improve their sales. When confronted with this problem, many executives use short-term thinking and try to drive revenue by cutting prices and marketing the product heavily. This action is seen in the reinforcing loop on the left. The more marketing we perform, the more sales we receive. However, sales are not only influenced by their marketing campaign. Sales are also influenced by customer satisfaction. In this system, improved sales drive customer demand for the service, but the company was not prepared for the increased demand and the service suffered. This is the balancing loop on the right, represented by the negative sign from demand exceeding capacity to sales. The service was so poor that new and existing customers moved to the competition. This loop shows us that the company's leverage, or solution to their problem, was to improve the service, not offer more discounts. Only if the influence from the balancing loop is resolved can the marketing campaigns improve the company's performance. Archetype. Wikipedia defines an archetype as a universally understood symbol or term or pattern of behavior, a prototype upon which others are copied, patterned, or emulated. It is important to study system archetypes so we can quickly identify leverage points for the system we are in. This is because patterns of organizational behavior are not unique. Without proper awareness, the system will lead the company down predictable paths of limited growth or decreasing performance. Knowledge of systems archetypes can be used to benefit your organization in two ways: diagnostically and prospectively. Diagnostically, helping your company understand patterns that are at work in your organization right now. You may even recognize some of your company's activities in one or more of these archetypes that we discussed today. Prospectively, the company uses its understanding of these patterns to foresee the problems they may have when they decide to implement change in the organization. It is useful to know how to recognize and avoid these archetypes to prevent the organization from adopting bad habits in the first place. Each archetype will have its own diagram that shows the relationship between efforts and results, actions and consequences. From these diagrams, you understand the need for systems thinking, which incorporates the theory that all actions are both a cause and an effect. From our AOL example, the effort made by the company to increase sales, continued marketing promotions, directly contributed to the thing that kept sales down, which was increased customer dissatisfaction. With systems thinking, it is easy to see how we can get trapped in vicious cycles. William Braun outlines 10 systems archetypes in his paper that we will discuss through the remainder of this episode. The first 5 are limits to growth, shifting the burden, eroding goals, escalation, and success to the successful. Then we have tragedy of the commons, fixes that fail, growth and underinvestment, accidental adversaries, and attractiveness principle. Each has its own pattern of parts and influences that have been identified as common to that archetype. As we move through these, think about instances in your company or your personal life that exhibit the same behavior. We will start with limits to growth since we have already seen an example of this with the AOL diagram from earlier. This is where a reinforcing dynamic is negated by a balancing dynamic. All efforts to progress are initially supported and reinforced, but eventually a balancing system counters the growth. The leverage comes from identifying and removing the balancing dynamic, not increasing the reinforcing dynamic. This archetype is often found in nature. Imagine a population of animals that live on an island. If there are no predators, the population continues to grow without restriction until they reach the limit of the food source or they catch a disease. My wife's family vacations on a small island off the coast of France every summer. There is a population of rabbits that live there. For the past few years, the numbers continued to grow until overpopulation pushed all the rabbits together. These close quarters allowed disease to spread rapidly. The disease reduced the population until the remaining rabbits were able to live far enough away from one another so that if one was sick, the rest could remain safe. In this scenario, the disease is a balancing action. Reproducing more rabbits would contribute to actually reducing the population. To increase the population, you need to find a cure for the disease. That is the leverage. Shifting the burden shows the tension between initiating a change to attack the symptom and a change that fixes the problem at the root cause. Often simply treating the symptom, a short-term solution, is more attractive than going after a long-term solution. The real problem is that the short-term fix often makes us think we fixed the real issue, and we lose interest in the long-term fix. If we follow arrows on the B1 loop, we see that the symptomatic solution creates a side effect that reduces the impact of a fundamental solution. This type of short-term thinking is anathema to creating a sustainable strategy. I experienced this situation when I worked for Sprint, a telecommunications company that had been in business for over 100 years. Sprint was trying to improve its position in the marketplace, so they hired a new CEO to help make this happen. He quickly outsourced their strategic decision-making to McKinsey, a consulting firm that often prioritizes profits over principle. McKinsey promoted a short-term, symptomatic solution, cutting employees to control costs. The company fired many of their employees. This lowered costs, but it made it difficult to improve customer service. Reacting to this problem, Sprint hired new employees, but continued to use McKinsey. This is the symptomatic solution from balancing loop B1. Their presence nullified our work, lowering the impact of the fundamental solution, which was allowing the workers to do their job and help the company grow. This side effect is the reinforcing loop because it helped the problem continue when it reduced the impact of the workers' efforts. As McKinsey took control, the fundamental solution of developing a long-term strategy, which is represented by balancing loop B2, could not contribute to problem solving. McKinsey eventually recommended another round of layoffs to show a potential buyer that they would be an asset for acquisition. In short, they were giving up and looking to be purchased by a competitor, which happened a few years after I left. Eroding goals is similar to shifting the burden because, again, there is a desire for a short-term fix. If we choose a symptomatic solution rather than a fundamental one, our actions to improve our condition will actually create a larger gap between our performance and our goal. This increases the pressure to adjust our goal to ensure it can be met. We admit that we simply cannot do what needs to be done. We allow ourselves to adjust our goals, so we are now able to live with the problems. In the future, this creates a culture of inferior achievement in the organization, since goals are uniformly discredited and never truly pursued. I saw this often when I worked as a personal trainer. I would meet a client and discuss their goals so we could create a training plan. Often, they arrive with a very specific picture in mind. For example, one client told me that she wanted Madonna's arms. This was in 2009 when Madonna was in excellent shape. So we would start the training, and perhaps the client does not see the results they want. Sometimes it is because they do not stick to the plan or a good diet. But whatever the reason, the goal begins to change. Instead of trying to look like their celebrity, they change their goal and choose to just be healthy or not worry about their diet too much. Businesses do the same thing. I worked at a financial investment firm once where a new system was going to be put in place. Word spread quickly that the company does this all the time. Don't get too invested in what is happening. Everything will be back to normal in 6 months, they said. And it was. Instead of the improved system, they changed the goal to fit their level of commitment to the solution. The way out of this archetype is to focus on the process, not the outcome. Ensure that proper change management activities have been put in place and set the goal to the process's performance. And if the process has been improved during a Six Sigma project, a fundamental solution, not a short-term fix, then your expected outcome can be calculated. That is your goal, not some arbitrary number that leadership creates out of thin air. Escalation is an archetype that can be found anytime there is strong competition in a marketplace. Each investment by company A is seen as a threat by company B, which in turn increases its own investment level. Company B's investment is seen as a threat by company A, and the cycle continues. One company may win, but both may also lose. During the Cold War, the United States and its allies were engaged in this pattern for decades against the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries. Each activity by one side, the development of a new weapon or technology, or a proxy war fought on someone else's soil, led to greater investment in military power. Eventually, the economic strain in the Soviet Union caused their system to collapse. It is estimated that over $8 trillion was spent by the US during this time. The leverage for this archetype is found in differentiation. If these two countries had not engaged in this tit-for-tat exchange, they could have invested those trillions of dollars in science or healthcare or education for their countries, and I suspect the world would be a better place today. Success to the successful describes the practice of rewarding teams based on results instead of needs. It seems counterintuitive, but companies often give more resources to teams that apparently do not need them. In this scenario, we start with two teams that are each given a task. For reasons outside their control, Team A is more successful than Team B. From then on, Team A is believed to be the better team, so the company treats them better. They are given better equipment, more important tasks, and additional resources. Team B, on the other hand, is not given proper resources or preferable projects and is not allowed to overcome their poor reputation. Therefore, all subsequent tasks will see that the successful Team A will continue to succeed while Team B continues to struggle. This archetype occurs when we forget that resources, support, and sometimes luck help the successful get that way in the first place. Companies find a way out of this archetype by using holistic measures. Many process improvement methodologies have devised financial calculations to value their projects in relation to the resources they use. One such calculation is return on investment, or ROI. If you have one team that has a reputation of always returning a large benefit from projects, measure the benefit as it relates to the costs. You may find that the projects with smaller benefit provide a higher ROI. Tragedy of the Commons describes how resources that are made available to everyone, the commons, can be stressed to the point of breaking. The organization is unaware of the demands placed by so many on the commons, so demands are left unchecked. All companies have equipment and personnel that are shared by multiple functions. Six Sigma projects will share data analysts. Executives will share assistants and office spaces, and engineers will share tools and equipment. Since no one completely owns these resources, no one takes full accountability for their maintenance and well-being. They are not seen as permanent pieces of a department, but rather consumables that just go bad after a while. For example, I worked for an Indian company that relied heavily on complex business intelligence software to support client needs. However, there were only a handful of engineers who knew these systems well enough to set up and maintain for every project. I spoke with one individual who mentioned he was working more than 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was only a matter of time before burnout would cause him to leave the company. Leverage is gained by understanding the system's view and seeing where demand can be alleviated. If this individual reported his time to one manager instead of several, they would see how much stress he was really under. Fixes that fail show how a symptomatic solution is chosen over a systemic solution, but this time there are unintended consequences that keep us from experiencing at least some palliative relief. For years, the tobacco industry steadfastly denied that there were any ill health effects from smoking, pouring vast amounts of money into advertising and a pattern of denials. The tactics served the industry well. However, each time it denied that smoking caused health problems, it stiffened the resolve of scientists, and research into the effects of smoking on health steadily grew. Ultimately, the amount of evidence grew so large that no amount of public relations or advertising could overcome the industry's claims. The unintended consequence of our actions acerbates our initial problem, adding more problems and confusion to the situation. Once again, solving the problem at the root cause and taking the proper steps for change management will always provide a better long-term solution to our issues. Growth and underinvestment is similar to limits to growth in that the organization is trying to grow without addressing the limiting factor. Without the investment needed, the company sees a drop in demand, which fuels the speculation that more investment is not needed. I have a friend who inherited a business from his parents. From an early age, he was asked to work after school, and it was always assumed that he would take it over when his parents retired. In the first few years as the sole manager, he was quite successful and enjoyed the financial benefits. But as equipment aged, competition mounted, and the company decided against innovating, the quality of the product and facility started to steadily decline. My friend found side projects more exciting, and he eventually ceded management decisions to his own children, leaving them an aging business with mounting problems. If he had just made some minor investments in research and development when his company was succeeding, it would have been in a better position to overcome the new challenges. But instead, he asked himself, why throw good money after bad? And took gains from his company to invest in those side projects. Accidental adversaries evolve in much the same way that escalation does, but it starts differently. In the beginning, there is no competition between the two companies. Then Company A does something that Company B feels threatens their market share, so they feel inclined to retaliate. One thing that sometimes gets overlooked is the psychology of process improvement. As a Six Sigma black belt, I have often been assigned projects that are not too popular. The project sponsor and champion have asked me to investigate a process that is not performing properly, but the process manager feels threatened. He has been trying his best for a long time and believes things are going just fine. Now, instead of working with me to improve his process, he actively works against me. The animosity he feels could have been avoided if the project sponsor had approached him first to make him a part of the solution. Companies find leverage by learning how actions are seen by others and to recommit to shared ideals. One way forward is to use the Socratic method of instruction to make the manager believe he came up with the idea for the improvement himself. Attractiveness principle identifies a growing action that is subject to multiple slowing actions, each one representing an opportunity and an opportunity cost. Opportunity cost refers to the potential profit provided by a missed opportunity, the result of choosing one alternative to another. The manager must decide which one is the most attractive to pursue. This archetype can be a real problem when trying to please important clients. The sales team believes that the customer wants a product at a lower price. The operation team thinks that the customer would be happiest if the product had a longer life cycle or reduced repair costs. The design team wants to add new features that they believe would delight the client. The project sponsor decides to throw their resources behind only one solution, and all the departments make their case that their idea should win. The leverage is found when the manager realizes that many of these problems can be fixed at once if he finds the root cause and pursues a systemic fix instead of a symptomatic one. A new feature, if designed for ease of production, could provide a higher quality product at a lower price. Well, that wraps up our episode on Agile. A copy of the transcript for this episode is available on our website at leanenglishconsulting.com. Leave a comment below and hit the like button if you enjoy this episode. And as always, if you find that you need more in-depth process improvement or language training, send me an email or give me a call. Thanks for listening. Until next time, be good, and I'll talk to you later. Well, that wraps up our episode on systems thinking. I know this episode was a little long, so I appreciate you sticking with me. A copy of the transcript for this episode is available on our website at leanenglishconsulting.com. Leave a comment below and hit the like button if you enjoyed this episode. And as always, if you find that you need more in-depth process improvement or language training, send me an email or give me a call. Thanks for listening. Until next time, be good, and I'll talk to you later.